Hey everybody, I am here once again with Dan Mons. What's up, man? How you doing?
Yeah, it's good. How you going, Bob?
Good. It's very early. It's I'm here with my coffee. You're there with your beer. I'm very jealous. I got too much to do to have a beer with you today. Otherwise, I would have absolutely loved to. But I guess we should probably open this by just politely reminding everybody that if you know a flat earther, you might want to let them know that there's not a global conspiracy that stops me from having a beer with Dan. The Earth's just freaking round.
Yeah, so it's pretty late here, but and it's also very hot here.
Yeah, and it's freezing here, which is hysterical. So hopefully the coffee and my giant ass hoodie will assist with this. But I've been wanting to have another one of these chats with you for a while now, just because I've been getting back into doing podcasting with people like this, and I really enjoyed our chat the first time, and so did a lot of my very let's say overly critical nerd friends. Really enjoyed our first chat
Yeah,
as
awesome.
well. So you got props from everybody. It's just really the time difference. But now I wanted to make sure we did this because of your latest invention, which I'm clearly giddy over based on how excited I got
That's
in the
great.
video. But RetroNAS, like, so I guess we should back up for a moment and just go back to how the heck do you know so much about Linux and are able to make something like this that everybody in the community could just use?
Yeah, so my career background, I guess, goes way back with Linux. I've been working in all sorts of fields, like media, VFX, architecture. I'm doing a lot of contracting now for high-performance compute, supercomputers, and that sort of stuff. So a lot of Linux-heavy industries that I've been working for. And a lot of them too using Linux as glue, and that's kind of where the background for RetroNAS came from. Like if there were different systems in different parts of businesses and they needed to communicate, and there was, either vendor software was really expensive, like to make, product A talk to product B would cost you tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars per year. It got too much. So a Linux box in the middle, a little bit of open source software that made them sort of talk to each other, and next thing you know, things are communicating. So that was kind of the many years of background that led to the idea of RetroNAS, which was, after seeing a lot of people for a lot of years fumble with storage or try home NAS solutions where either they were too difficult or they were pushing ahead, they were starting to use protocols that were too new and they were leaving old stuff behind. Sort of all that kind of just fell together as a product that I thought I could do something, build something.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But I mean, you do go a little farther because, like, I was born and raised in the DOS world, so that's the only analogies I could make to that is that, my first computers didn't have hard drives. You had to just boot and type everything in manually each time. And then anybody who wanted to stick with it graduated to some kind of batch files. I mean, gaming nerds were always forced to do that with the auto exec batch file to load up your Sound Blaster drivers, but it kind of took off from there in the IT world. But there's always a line that's crossed where are you writing software or are you just, dicking around with batching the operating system? And you definitely have software experience too. I do not.
Yeah, I guess so. Like, I mean, my job is officially sort of systems integrator, systems administrator kind of thing. But yeah, that world, especially in Linux, does force you to write a bit of code. Automation is everything now. There's nothing you don't automate anymore. So a lot of the background to RetroNAS are just automation tools that I'm using to sort of glue bits of open source together. So yeah, it's a half-half project. I wouldn't call it a software development project, but it kind of is, but it kind of isn't. Yeah, it's an integration project. I don't know, lots of bits and pieces there.
Yeah, so I tried to structure the video in a way where it's like anybody could just watch it and get it. But I think I think the people that will be more confused by the video are people with technical knowledge. I think like the general, like, I know how to build a computer public will be like, okay, cool, we get to run something on top of something that has this software. But from more of an IT perspective on things, RetroNAS is basically just protocols running in the background mixed together in a wrapper that allows you to point it to different things. So I mean, that's probably a shitty
No, it's pretty
explanation.
close.
Maybe you want to
Yeah.
you do the explanation.
Well, I guess different operating systems and different tools over the years have all had different requirements when it comes to how they transfer data back and forth. So, Linux, or the open source community, I guess, it's not even really Linux. These things have sort of been developed over years. So whether it's something like the Samba project, which was sort of the thing that blew open the SMB protocol, which is the protocol that most, it started in DOS with Landman, and then it moved on to Windows, went through Windows NT, and then into what we know as, XP 2000, those sorts of era systems. Open source researchers did a lot of reverse engineering and open sourcing those standards back in sort of the dark old days, when Microsoft were the bad guy. And because of that, those tools have had, decades of people using them in anger. So whether it's that, whether it's like NetAtalk for the AFP stuff, so for the old Apple stuff, whether it's web stuff, FTP stuff, whether it's stuff that has been sort of Unixy forever, or stuff that's been Windowsy that Unix and Linux have adopted, all those tools exist, and I guess the challenge is configuring them, right? Like, they're a pain in the ass to configure. Even for techie people, they can be really problematic.
Yes.
So, just lumping all these things together and having a Swiss Army knife of storage options was kind of what I wanted, something that would suit everyone. And console stuff is definitely a big part of it, and that's half the picture, I guess. The other half, obviously, is all the retro computing stuff that I want to do with it too. So it's obviously young, and there's only a few things really on the giant list of stuff that I actually want to get through. But even with that, I think there's still a lot of stuff that it can do already.
Yeah, one of the things that I didn't make the best point of highlighting in the video, because once again, I just didn't want to confuse people. I wanted to hit that like 10-minute sweet spot of this is what it is, and if you like it, cool, and if you don't care, fine. But this isn't just a network share. And I think that's one kind of part of what I meant by maybe people with IT knowledge might be like, so RetroNAS is a project that creates a network share. I could right click on my drive and do that right from Windows. What do we need this for? And while yes, it does do that, it's way deeper than that. So you have, I guess, one thing that I know enough about to confidently speak in is that you load the original SMB protocol on there, which, yes, it's unsecure and it's unsafe, and there's security nerds' heads are going to be exploding now, except remember that the point of this is to send people to stream your ROMs, not to have your tax information on the same drive or something. But you open up the older protocols so that things like PlayStation 2 could connect directly to it. And that's what I was missing. The two things I was missing when I tried it myself was making sure SMB1 was enabled properly, because in Windows you could do it, but there's always a thing where, there's always a trick, fucking Bill Gates. But it's also the file structure as well that it's looking at. So it creates everything in a way where you just click on PS2 and drop your ISOs in.
Yeah, so I guess like those older protocols have been slowly deprecated by different companies, which is a good thing, mind you, right? Like for regular home users, for business users, that should be happening. They should be getting rid of those older protocols because they're not secure. But yeah, definitely for home users, it's like the argument of having everything encrypted all the time. But if you're at home playing with retro computers, does it really matter? Do you need everything encrypted? So that's kind of the idea with this. I'm trying to open up all of these really legacy protocols, and even before SMB1, right? So SMB1, in the form that OpenPS2 Loader knows about, is really like, I think, the third or fourth iteration of what used to be a thing called LAN Manager, and then some other protocols in there called NTLM, and a family of encryption and whatnot. So that goes way back to like MS-DOS file sharing days, and that sort of era. So I open up all those protocols right back to that, and yeah, you can do it. Well, you can't do LANman in Windows 10, but you can certainly do SMB1. But like you mentioned, there's a lot of stuff in about. Like there's registry hacks and there's things you've got to change. And more recently, I know Windows 10 resets that on certain security updates. So as updates roll out down the track, you're going to have to keep undoing those changes or redoing them on your side, undoing what Microsoft have blocked. And again, I understand why Microsoft are doing that. Like, it's a good thing that they're doing that for most people. But yeah, if you've got a lot of retro stuff lying around, it's a real pain. And really, like, OpenPS2 Loader is not that retro. Like, it's not sort of 8 16-bit console retro. So You know, it's kind of annoying that even that generation's already losing out without something to support it.
Yeah. Well, I think this is going to be a good solution. I think the other thing that I didn't cover in the video that I wanted to just ask you about directly, because your answer is going to be better than mine, is in the situation of somebody's running like a Synology NAS or or any other device. Like I know Ed from Space Invader 1 was looking into possibly making an Unraid Docker for it, which I'm crossing my fingers on. But for all of that stuff, how exactly does that work? So is it the Linux equivalent of running installers for all of those protocols, creating a share on your existing NAS drive, and just creating a folder on it and pointing everything there?
Yeah, so it would probably end up being, I mean, there's a lot of sort of it depends kind of answers that would come out of it. One of the big things is when you've got two protocols that do the same thing that use the same ports. So, for example, say you had an Unraid or a TrueNAS, FreeNAS type solution, and they had SMB running already, and you wanted to keep that. That's your like secure main SMB area, and then you want to run RetroNAS. What do? There's a couple of ways around it. It would probably involve, a second IP on the machine or something like that. So one listens on one IP, one listens on the other IP. It might have to be something like that, or it might just be a matter of. I mean, the other thing is that RetroNAS, because it uses Samba, the open source SMB stack, Samba will try to connect at the most secure option that is available at both ends. So it'll auto-negotiate. So in one of my videos, I demonstrated if you connect in via a Windows 10 or Windows 11 machine, that will connect in so Windows 11 uses SMB 3.11, the latest version of the SMB protocol, and you'll see that RetroNAS will connect at that, and it'll do full packet signing and all that kind of stuff. So RetroNAS and Samba specifically, it's not something I do, it's what the Samba stack does. It will try and always connect at the highest security protocol. So in the case of some of those things, it might be, potentially you can turn off the SMB that's included with the NAS and just run SMB via RetroNAS inside the container. I really think it's going to be, because it's so flexible and because there's so many options and so many use cases, there might be a little bit of that complexity around it. Really depends on who's using it for what. But I mean, I'm hoping to get a lot of feedback from people too as to what the more common use cases are. And then just tailor images for those people. So, there'll always be a nerdy version available for anybody who just wants to go crazy and do whatever they want to do. But if there's overwhelming screaming from people that they want a specific setup that's really easy, I can make something that's way more pre-baked and ready to roll for whatever people are doing with it, whether it's Unraid or TrueNAS or any of the other Synology type stuff that's out there. Whether they want VMs, whether they want Docker containers, whether they want images, whatever it is that people want, we can build that kind of stuff. It's pretty easy.
Yeah, I mean, it's always my approach in situations like this to have the community kind of jump in and help, because and I obviously mean this with all the respect in the world, but I would rather not see you waste your time on stuff that plenty of other people could do. I want to see you spend your time on stuff that you are the expert in, that you could add more than everybody else to, because you're the creator of the project, you understand how all the software works. So that's kind of why I was very happy to hear Ed was going to take a look at it, because he's already an Unraid expert, and you already laid the groundwork. So having him build the container, so that way maybe it does just sit in its own container, and that way all the protocols don't affect anything else. But that way he could take that on, so you don't have to sit there and then go through all of the Unraid documentation and figure out all of its little quirks. I'm kind of hoping this really is a community project where people will just start stepping up and being like, hey, I'm good at this, I could add that for you. So
yeah, absolutely.
We'll see,
I mean, like the way that Samba's configured is all done through. So there's a bit of software that runs over the top of all this called Ansible, which is just a configuration management tool. That's kind of the magic sauce. And we use that in Linux land, especially in professional scenarios where we want to configure lots of machines. So if you're working for a company like, I don't know, a big Netflixy type company who's got millions and millions of nodes around the planet, you don't want to be logging into each one of these doing things. So RetroNAS uses the same tools that those sorts of companies would use to just automatically configure things in a given way. So if you dive into the Ansible code that I've written, it spells out really clearly what I'm doing. So whether if the Unraid community either want to steal my config and use that directly in their tools so that they don't even have to really use the full stack. They can do that. If they just want to build containers, they can do that. Like, there's heaps of options there for on their side to do really whatever they want to do in whatever way they feel is the easiest way to do it.
And you made the joke about steal the code, but do you, this is 100% open source. Yeah, yeah. And which license did you use?
I've got the MIT license on this one. Normally, I'm a big GPL fanboy,
okay.
But you know, there's philosophical arguments always about how free is free. So the MIT license is probably, I think, one of the least restrictive and legally binding least restrictive, if that makes sense. So no one can question how free it is. Yeah, so
right. Isn't it the MIT license basically do whatever you want with it, but it's not my fucking problem?
Exactly.
Yeah. Wrong.
You can't sue me,
Okay.
but you can do whatever the hell you like, right? You don't have to attribute me. You don't have to. You can sell it. I don't care. Like, do whatever you want. Really, it's pretty much as open as it gets.
Well, I do hope people jump on this, because while you and I have talked about very short-term additions that, you know, I already have parts en route to start testing, and we've talked about slightly longer-term, far in the future, if this really does take off, I could completely see it being like an Unraid for retro nerds who want to run their pre-configured retro OS VMs on there, and, you know, like I could absolutely see this being something that, you know, many years down the line becomes its own beast altogether, or once again also grows parallel as an Unraid Docker, as, you know, just a very basic command line thing added to a, you know, a Synology NAS or something like that. But I do see potential for so many things.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like, one of the things that really got me thinking probably 6 months back, I was looking at Retro Man Cave, Neil from Retro Man Cave, his setup. Yeah, great channel, watch a lot of his stuff. And he was building a museum, an interactive museum. I guess unlucky timing for him with COVID and everything. It's probably hard to get people in there, but that's what he was building. And it sort of got me thinking. I've dealt with sort of museum preservation groups here in Australia. There's a couple in Europe that I dealt with. On my website, I've got some stuff on how to run native emulators inside your browser, so the code actually executes inside your browser and you can run emulators through the browser. So the same sort of stuff that archive.org do with their tools. So I was in contact with a couple of preservation groups in Europe who were using that documentation that I wrote to do those sorts of things, and it dawned on me that there are more and more places building now that have like a wide array of retro stuff. So, you know, different to, I guess, like, I want to appeal to everybody. I'm not trying to exclude this group or exclude that group, but, you know, there are gamers who want to play their favorite system. That's cool, right? Like, you know, maybe RetroNAS doesn't even suit them. If they've got one system, then sure, use an SD card, don't worry about it. But if you've got 2 or 3 systems and you want to share ROMs, if you've got you know, a lot of one type of system, like, that's a big one, right? Like, if you've got, say, for some reason you've got 3 or 4 PlayStation 2s or PlayStation 3s or Xbox 360s, all these things supported by RetroNAS. You know, most recently I got Nintendo 3DS stuff working, so you can RetroNAS will generate a QR code and let you scan that with a 3DS and install games on your 3DS. So say you've got a few of those lying around for whatever reason, whether you've just got friends over, or whether you're running one of these weird museum thingies. It starts to become really useful to have everything in one spot that you can access over however many different protocols you need to access that thing over. So, you know, it's not that you have to go and tweak your Amiga to be able to use SMB. Like, it's just, oh, well, look, I can fire up a web browser on my Amiga, pull the same files off that I put there from my Windows 95 machine. So you can start to get to those sort of silly scenarios where anybody can do anything with any system, no matter what they've got. Doesn't matter if it's computer or console. So that's kind of the desire, is to make that, you know, particularly for collectors, for anyone running these small sort of boutique museums, anything like that, right down to people who literally just want a simple solution to play games. I want to try and cover all of that if I can.
Yeah, and it's funny, I've talked to a bunch of non-technically oriented people about this project, and I was kind of like, all right, well, you know, it's all of your stuff in one place, but, like, hear me out, think about this, and, like, I didn't even get past the second sentence, and they're like, holy crap, so I could do this, and I could do that, and I could do that. I'm like, yeah, you get it? And they're like, yeah, why wouldn't I get it? I'm like, okay, I was really afraid this would be a project where people would be like, where nerds would be like, it's a network share, I don't give a shit, and non-nerds would be like, I'm not setting up a full server in my house. And the people that I've spoken to, neither of those things have ever come up. It is not, no one that I've talked to visualized it that way, which is a very good thing.
Yeah,
So,
definitely, keeping those options open, even on the hardware side, right? Like whether it's a Raspberry Pi, whether it's a existing NAS that you've got, whether it's a junker computer, whether it's a virtual machine, like just giving people as many options as possible, because especially now, right, we're in the middle of this silicon shortage and it sucks. Like nobody can get gear to do anything. So what have you got lying around that you can throw this crap on and make work? And without trying to beat the open source drum too much, right? Like that's why I love Linux. You can run it on anything. There's a book you can buy called How to Install Linux on a Dead Badger, which I think is the funniest book ever. It's a joke clearly, but I mean that's kind of the point, right? It'll run on anything. So what have you got lying about? Put it on that, and that becomes your central store for all your other old crap. And it's all super COVID safe. You can sit at home and tinker with crap that you've got already. You don't have to buy stuff. Have a bit of fun with old computers while you're in lockdown or something.
yeah, absolutely. And talking about lockdown and not being able to communicate except over the internet, another future thing I could envision this being is like central nodes for linking different people's networks together, because creating VPNs, especially through your router, it's stuff that like your average person doesn't want to have to deal with. Even a lot of myself and my fellow nerds are like, man, I don't want to open this up and then like forget to turn it off and have an open port going into my network. Whereas I could totally see that being integrated into this, where you pull up the I call it a GUI, but it's sort of a GUI that you have there. But whatever, the graphic interface, and open port, or connect to whatever, and then play your games across the internet with people. Stuff like the stack smashing, I believe it was, the Tetris across the internet, stuff like that. And then when you're done, just turn it off. So number one, the insecure, if you want to call it that, port was only open for the Game Boy. And it doesn't matter if somebody finds some kind of exploit to that, because when you're done, you just turn it off and you're good to go. So just don't do your taxes on your Game Boy through the protocol.
Absolutely. And it's all stuff that I want to have a look at too, right? Like there's a whole bunch of different projects, open source projects that people have got going to do that sort of stuff. I came across one the other day that looked at linking, original Xboxes over the internet using a whole bunch of different port forwarding things. There's the DreamPi project, the Dreamcast stuff, where people are doing the dial-up modem through a Raspberry Pi out to the internet or out to private servers. So that's on my list of things to have a look at as well.
And that's just people would get those things that are designed for fax machines. That's telephone to IP protocol, right? And then
it's actually really fascinating. It's so much simpler than that. The DreamPi is really, really clever. So what it does is the modem on the Raspberry Pi listens as a serial device, and you get another modem from another device that expects a dial tone. And they, with a 9-volt battery and a little bit of a circuitry in the middle, they literally just shove dial tone from one to the other. So it doesn't go over any phone system. It doesn't actually go through a VoIP system, through a phone system. It's literally just two modems talking to each other. The Raspberry Pi side is just lying to the other side, saying, yeah, it's totally a dial tone, trust me. And the other side goes, sure, whatever, and just does what it does. So it's a super clever bit of like low-tech, high-tech, if you will. That manages to do that. And then there are people who've managed to get it working with like old clamshell MacBooks and things like that. So it's all on my list to have a look at that kind of stuff. That works doubly too, because then as soon as that stuff works, there's PPP sessions that link up. That means you get an IP over this. That means that now you can use through a dial-up modem RetroNAS as a file sharing device. So it's not just something that can be used with a Dreamcast for games. It now becomes I've got an old laptop, it's only got a modem port in it. I can use that modem port to connect to my RetroNAS and grab files off it, or grab a BIOS off it, or all those sorts of things. So all these tools are like really multi-useful in surprising ways, I think. And I mean, again, this is all the
Yeah.
open source community, right? This is all. I haven't invented any of this. I'm just gluing it together. Other people are doing these really cool projects that hopefully I can integrate into this thing and just make it this big Swiss Army knife.
Yeah, I really hope everybody embraces the open source part, because there have been those pretty vocal and public instances over the years where people decided that maybe, oh, I shouldn't have open sourced this, or I open sourced it, but I really just want to be the only person that works on it. And it's like, that's not what this is about at all. And that's not the majority, by the way. The majority of people, like my favorite was Renee from DB Electronics, opens up his web browser one day and sees that a company had just made a whole run of one of his open source projects, and they're selling it at a reasonable price. And he's zooming in on the pictures, and he's like, it looks like it's built well. I'm like, so you pissed that they stole your design? And he's like, they didn't steal it. It's open source. And now I could buy one for cheaper than it would have cost me to order the parts to make one.
Yeah.
So that's it's a fun example, but that's the majority of people in the scene really are that cool about this stuff, because that's why they wanted to open source it.
Well, look, I definitely think it does come down to, there's a lot of personal choice in it. I don't ever, I'm a huge open source fan, but I would never push open source on somebody else. Like, it's up to them to make that choice for themselves. But I think, there is, hardware's a tricky one, because I don't know, maybe it's just because I've been in the software world my whole life, I undervalue the difficulty in software. But I look at hardware design and think, these guys are magic. Like, I don't understand how anyone designs hardware. It's all alien and weird to me. So if someone designed a hardware thing and open source it, I really admire that. I think that's pretty cool to do that. That's like a next level up. But again, if you had a product that it cost you a lot of money to make, and you wanted to make some money back, right? You dropped a lot of cash on, especially pre-FPGA, it's really difficult to design chips and circuits and things like that. And if you screw up and you've ordered 100 of these things, it's going to cost you a fortune. So fair enough if people want to make money off that, and maybe close it for a bit and open it later, or whatever they're doing. Mm-hmm. I'm cool with that. But literally, I think the important point of RetroNAS is that all the projects I'm using are open source projects, and I'm just gobbling all those together, gluing them together, configuring them in ways that are compatible with as many things as I can, and desperately trying to make that as easy as possible for as many people as possible. So that's kind of the goal. But yeah, look, I'm not putting the hard work into the protocols themselves. That's been done for like the last 20 years of people, lots of people working really hard on that kind of stuff. Just gluing these things together.
Awesome. So just to bounce back to the DreamPi for a second, have you gotten that working? Have you tested it out on, not via RetroNAS, just DreamPi in general? Have you used that project before?
No, I'm not a big Phantasy Star Online fan. That seems to be the big sort of community behind that. And that's both, from what I can tell, it's both GameCube and Dreamcast. There seems to be big communities behind those. I've got a couple of GameCubes, but no broadband or modem adapters for them. They're pretty expensive. So I'm hoping to either borrow one. I've put the word out on a local forum that I'm on. Hopefully I can borrow one. There's a couple of GameCube fans on there. Or, I don't know, I'd love to see somebody design one. Back to the whole hardware is magic kind of thing, if someone can make one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have ordered all the parts I need for the Dreamcast one. So that's on its way. A slow boat from China. Hopefully it'll arrive here in the next month or so. And then I can start fiddling with that. And again, that one's multi-useful, because I'll also be testing a bunch of old PCs and Macs, dialing out some DOS machines as well. I've got the equipment for, it's not gaming related, but I've got a whole bunch of RS-232 serial adapters to make null modem cables. So that's all like Amiga, Atari ST, old DOS PCs, that kind of stuff, getting them either sharing files directly or on the internet. And then obviously there's another project that I've integrated in RetroNAS called Web1. I like that one a lot. It's a proxy, so it sits in the middle. You point your really old web browser at it, and then it goes out to the internet. It'll fetch your website, and it'll strip all the CSS out, it'll strip all the JavaScript out, it'll strip all the HTTPS out, and just give you sort of like a plain text kind of version as much as it can back to your browser. So again, that's another.
So that's for people that have like retro computers that they managed to connect to the network, but they what do they set the proxy to
Correct.
RetroNAS and then that does the translation. So you're still just going to like RetroRGB.com, but it's the proxy set, so it does all that. That is absolutely hysterical.
That's pretty cool.
And
well,
I'm looking forward to seeing that.
Well, it works. It's in there now, so you can test it out. And you can test it through a VM too. So if you just like, one of the easiest ways to do it is just to load up a Windows 95 VM, use Internet Explorer, whatever 4 or 5 that came with that, and then try and browse regular websites without the proxy. See what that looks like. It sucks. And then try it with the proxy and see how much works and how much doesn't. But the somewhat practical use, not just for lols and having a laugh, but you can browse archive.org, download legitimate software from archive.org. Maybe you need a USB driver, or maybe you need a something. There's some bit of bespoke hardware or a game that you want to get or whatever. You can now download that direct, particularly from big archive sites, all the abandonware sites, all that kind of stuff. You can get to those fairly easily. So your other option, of course, is download it from a modern computer, drop it on RetroNAS, and then SMB it down to your Windows 95 machine. That works too, or FTP or HTTP or whatever it is that you want to. There's probably 3 or 4 ways I can think of that you can get files off RetroNAS to a Windows 95 device. But the further back you go in time, the fewer protocols are available to old systems. But yeah, certainly just trying to maximize that spread of things that can talk to it and weird stuff you can do.
Yeah, so for the retro computer stuff, I have 0 of it here, other than maybe a VM I have on my hard drives or something. I think a while back, somebody was put together a pack of like every version of Windows, up to like ME or 2000 or something like that, and so that's my only access at the moment. So could you talk a little bit more about some of the retro PC stuff that you've integrated in? Because I thought that was really cool as well.
So I guess NetAtalk is the fun one for me. Like I these days I don't use a lot of Mac stuff, but there was a period in my life where I was a bit of a Mac fanboy for a minute, and I guess nostalgically too, I like the design of that OS 9, even maybe OS 8 era of Mac. I've got myself a one of the old CRT iMacs. Which I adore. I think they're just the best looking machine ever made, because it's got a whopping big CRT on it, and I love CRTs, but B, I love the aesthetics of it. So one of the challenges with really old Mac OS is that they use protocols before TCP/IP, and that can get really challenging. So NetAtalk comes in 2 flavors. So that's the open source stack of protocols that support file sharing over Mac. NetAtalk 3 is the current one that's in production. So if you jump on any Linux machine and say, hey, install NetAtalk, it'll put NetAtalk 3 on there. Works really well for, I think Apple finally deprecated what they call AppleTalk, or AFP, Apple Filer Protocol. They deprecated that in the brand new macOS. So if you get the new, whatever, the Big Sur or whatever it is, and onwards, that won't work anymore. But your OS X machines from 10.2 to 10.15, they all spoke AppleTalk over TCP/IP. So did OS 9. But you go back before then, and they do what they call Apple Share over AppleTalk. So AppleTalk there, they're referring to not like a high-level protocol, but that's the actual protocol that is sharing at a network level. So I don't know if you remember IPX as a network standard pre-TCP. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there was AppleTalk, IPX, TCP, and a few other whole bunch of different ones at the time. Obviously, Ethernet won the day because it was on the internet and everybody used. Sorry, not Ethernet. IP won the day because that was on the internet. And it's good. Don't get me wrong. Like, it's a good protocol. It has its negatives, but generally it's really good over long distances and crappy links, which is why it's so popular. Wi-Fi especially. But yeah, so AppleTalk works without IP. So the earliest Mac I've managed to make it work on is an Apple IIgs. So that's working. The actual configuration isn't in RetroNAS yet. I'm working on that. But yeah, there's a NetAtalk 2 option. So there's 2 options in the menu. There's 2 and 3. If you choose 2, that'll definitely work all the way back to OS system. I tested System 7 and it works. I don't know about System 6. But the new one that's coming out will go all the way back to Apple IIgs running GSOS, which was a special version of OS System 7, and that will share files. There is even a way, apparently, to boot an Apple IIgs raw, so no disks in it, no nothing. Like say you've acquired yourself an Apple IIgs, and you don't even have floppy drives with it, like no OS or anything like that. It's that old cold boot problem, right? Like I need to put an OS on this floppy drive to boot that computer to put an OS on this floppy drive, right? You can't get around that. So by all accounts, you can network boot these things, feed it a ROM over AppleTalk, write that ROM to the floppy disk, and then that floppy disk becomes your boot disk. So that's another process I've got to go through and test. But I'm 99% sure that that will work based on the testing that I've done. But again, that's all like the open source community there. I wish I could remember his name. There's one person who's essentially revived the NetAtalk 2 code base just recently, probably 6 months ago. Single-handedly got that project back up and running, integrated a whole bunch of community patches into the old code base, made it compile on modern computers, and then pushed that forward. So, you know, huge props to that person. Without that person, this wouldn't exist. But what it means is that you can go really far back with old Macs. So that's one thing. I definitely want to get all the serial null modem stuff working. So that'll then start to integrate, Amiga, and probably Atari ST. I'm pretty sure they've all got PPP drivers, so you can get internet access out of a serial cable. And then on the RetroNAS side, you can either use a USB to serial, so the 9-pin RS-232 cables, and on a Raspberry Pi, I bought 2 or 3 different brands from China. They've arrived. The GPIO headers on the Raspberry Pi, 4 of those will work like TTL. So they'll talk TTL serial into an adapter, and that adapter will turn it to RS-232. Now, they cost me like 40 cents to buy those, which is pretty crazy. So
it's the one that's just the cable, right? It looks just like a cable, but there's a little chip in there doing the translation. I think I have like 3 of those.
Yeah, there's a few of those too, yeah. Mine's kind of blown out. It looks like it's a hand-soldered thing or something. Like it's pretty macro, but you can get them really tiny as well. So, having that there means that, that opens that up to a whole bunch of different computers, because there's a lot of stuff out there that I have no idea about, all sorts of weird and wonderful computers. But, RS-232 serial talking PPP over that was pretty stock standard for like a whole decade or more. So anything that talks that will probably be able to file share somehow back to RetroNAS. So, I've got TFTP, FTP, HTTP, like they're the really old school sort of protocols, and then bigger ones like NFS and SMB and those sorts of things. So even getting into 90s Unixes, I've got a couple of mates who still have SGI, Silicon Graphics machines lying around because they're all VFX artists, so they had these machines way back in the day, working on some pretty crazy films back in the, I guess, late 90s, early 2000s, early days of VFX. They keep whinging to me that they can't use these machines and they love them and they want to be able to do stuff with them. So, keeping them in the back of my mind too. Hopefully we'll get some stuff working for them so that their old computers can get back to life and get connected to the internet and do some fun stuff.
Weren't those old Silicon Graphics computers like ridiculously expensive?
Oh, yeah.
Because they were the ones that designed all the 3D stuff.
Crazy. So. They were crazy expensive. I was working in media 2001, 2002, and we were buying workstations then for like an average sort of low-end, low-spec 3D. Like we weren't even doing VFX, we were doing 3D fly-throughs and things like that. And those machines were clocking in at like 15 to 20 grand for a decent 3D workstation. So then, you go back 5 years before then and you're looking at those high-end Silicon Graphics machines. Or the media machines. So Silicon Graphics made a machine called the Tesro, which is an awesome looking thing. It looks like a big, from the front, kind of like a 4-leaf clover, but it's like long. Not quite cylindrical. It's like a cube with cylinders on the edges. I don't know how to describe it. And it's purple, which is awesome. Like, bring back purple computers. And that thing would have been, you'd fill that full of SCSI drives and high-end fiber cables and things, and it's a 40 grand computer. That you'd use for 3 years on one film and then throw in the bin. So, like bringing that stuff back to life sounds pretty cool if I can do that.
That's so fascinating. When I was a kid, so I was probably 11 years old at this point, so early 90s, I wanted to go, I moved in with my grandparents who lived in the ghetto, but I wanted to like go mow lawns and stuff to try to make money to buy a Sega Genesis. So like, there's like lawns with like three pieces of grass, and I'm knocking on all the doors, and one of the people there's like one of the only lawns in the neighborhood and the grass is 3 feet tall, and I was like, I could do that for you. And the guy ended up never paying me. What a scumbag. I did it like every week for a month and a half, and then he never paid me, so I just let it grow again. But he invited me in. His son was a little younger than me, and he showed me this computer, and he showed me what he was working on. And he did graphics for things like Star Trek The Next Generation, where you see it flying through space and stuff like that. And I was like, oh man, could I have that software? And like, he looks at me and he's like, well, I could copy you the software, but it won't even load because you need one of those. And there was like, it looked like a computer plugged into a computer, and I think that was the external graphics card that they had, like the processing unit for it. And I mean, that must have been, I mean, this is all going off of memory 30 years ago, but I vaguely remember him saying it was like a $20,000 thing. And it wasn't his; it was his company's. And he would just sit at home and make these graphics for these TV shows and stuff like that. So I'd love to see one of those again.
Sounds like you had a lot of like old HP Unix workstations and stuff back around that era. They were starting to get into that. All running like early versions of X Windows, which is kind of the precursor of what modern day Linux graphics uses under the hood. Although that's all A has changed a lot, and B is continuing to change, obviously. But yeah, like all that old stuff, right? So definitely RetroNAS. I've got NFS version 2 working as well, which was the first publicly released version of NFS. So that will go all the way back to Unix System 5. So all your like really old Sun and HP workstations from the, I'm going to say mid-90s onwards. Pretty much anything with an Ethernet card in it will work. So one of the challenges actually is once you go back far enough, even getting Ethernet is hard. There's a lot of proprietary connectors in things before then. Like I was looking at some old Macs a little while ago, and they've got this like weird serial adapter that then converts stuff to Ethernet, and then it's like, I think 10 megabit Ethernet, but you can only get 3 megabit out of the link and stuff like that. So there's certainly even physical challenges after a while trying to plug things in. So there's definitely on my radar to look at that side of RetroNAS as well. Whatever devices it takes to physically plug things in, trying to figure out what to do there, because having the software is half of it, but if you don't have hardware to physically plug in, it can get a bit tricky.
Yeah, I mean, it's, we were just talking about like the GameCube Ethernet adapter, potentially loading software there, but we got to get you one. I think I know somebody will probably just send you theirs, cool. just to have. But I mean, we also need somebody to reverse engineer that and build a little Ethernet adapter somehow for the GameCube. And it doesn't really matter how we go about doing that. Maybe it's reverse engineering that. Maybe it's a Wi-Fi adapter. Excuse me, respectfully, I don't really care how it's done as long as people get through it. But one of the things that I was really looking forward to kind of digging deeper in, which I don't even know how well this would work, but that project that I sent you that basically turned the Pi 02 into something that translates networked shared folders to USB. And that's something that I've wanted for well over 10 years now. It all started when I had a Blu-ray player that could play everything over USB, but it could only read up to 8 terabyte or up to 2 terabyte hard drives and nothing bigger than that. So it's like, I would have loved to have had a USB device that I could plug into the network. Back then, Wi-Fi wasn't fast enough. It totally would be now, though. But I'd love to have something like that. Are you familiar with how that's done? Is this something that's been available for a while?
Yeah, again, so this is all getting into hardware stuff that I don't fully know, but I do know like the ESP32. So that's the thing, if you look at a GBS control, you stick that circuit on top and then you can hit it over Wi-Fi. So that sort of was a bit of a game changer, I guess, for like tinkerers and embedded electronics people. Because it's a known popular chip. It can run a whole bunch of code. You can write, I think you can do a small Linux stack for it, but you can also just write C code directly for it. And essentially it just glues a serial bus to a Wi-Fi adapter with a chip that's fast enough to run, Linux Junior on it. And so that mishmash of hardware really changed everything. And so now pretty much if you look at any kind of tinkerer hobbyist kind of hardware hacking, everybody's using these little ESP32s. There's another one that's like the next model up that's more powerful. I forget what that is. I can't remember the name of it. And now there's a lot of RISC-V or RISC-V chips that are coming out, and they're doing a lot of that sort of thing where it's like the next step up in terms of power. So yeah, the common element there is that they're all just on a serial bus. So once you're talking serial, as long as your voltages are relatively in spec and you're sending the right kind of serial data, things are, I'm not going to say simple because it's well over my head and how it all works at an actual sort of technical level. But you know, they're all talking serial, so that's an advantage. So in the same way that you can get a USB device and plug RS-232 out of the end of it because it's all serial, or you can do USB to SATA or SAS or any of those sorts of things because again, it's all serial. So that's kind of the beauty of it. As long as they're all serial, they can sort of talk. So you know, next jump ahead from there, doing something where you know, you're talking serial over this bus, out the end of it you're talking some sort of configured Wi-Fi, and that goes back to something else. So tiny little embedded system on there that's running something, some little Linux BSD or C thing, potentially picking up a RetroNAS or some other device that's mounting that in, and then you can just feed data to that. So you know, I see a little bit of that in the 3D printing kind of homebrew area. I'm seeing a lot of people adding Wi-Fi capabilities to the 3D printers using exactly that kind of tech, taking that leap over to, you know, flash cards and small embedded systems and, you know, even old computers. The Commodore 64, you can buy a cartridge that you can plug in the back of your Commodore 64, or maybe it goes into one of the COM ports. And it's got an ESP32 hanging off the back of it, so you can do PPP over that. So that's Wi-Fi back to your home router, and then your Commodore 64 can get on the internet and go to, you know, browse BBSs and things like that. So you know, that's low spec data traversal, like it's all sort of, you know, 9600 baud modem kind of speeds, but it can do it, and it's just using this like little $2 chip hanging off the end of it. So that's got a lot of possibilities. Whether it's fast enough, who knows? But again, if you're talking retro computers, it might be fast enough. And if you're talking use cases like you know, pushing a very small whatever NES or Super Nintendo ROM to a device that's pretending to be a micro SD card, you know, that's really possible too. So I think there's heaps of options.
I think it would be good for up to, yeah, I think that would even be okay for at least up to DVDs, because the Wi-Fi transfer speed, unless you have shit Wi-Fi, is going to be faster than an IDE bus, that, you know, especially with retro consoles. Because one of the things that I really want to see moving forward is everybody who makes ODEs, including a Wi-Fi chip that you could use to access stuff like this, or even I would love to see everybody have a connect to RetroNAS button where you just put in your user and password and that's it. But like, I think, you know, and that project of having a Wi-Fi USB stick, let's just say, like, I genuinely think that could be a game changer, not just for retro games, but for retro PCs, or even just for convenience. I mean, how many times, just as, you know, as an IT nerd, have you had a family member ask you to fix their computer, and then you have to download the Ethernet drivers? It's like, all right, well, how much am I going to do on this computer? How much am I going to download on mine? Let me just keep switching the USB stick back and forth. Like, it would have been way cooler to just plug in that Wi-Fi thing, you know, just make sure the USB driver's loaded, and that's it. Now you could access whatever you want right from there. So I think stuff like that is going to be huge, as long as, you know, as long as more people get on board and get it implemented. Because a lot of the ODEs, or not a lot of them, but at least the X Station has a Wi-Fi chip in there. But I don't know. I think it was that one. No, it was I could be getting it wrong. It's early, but I know the Fenrir had it, and SED is definitely looking into doing exactly what we're talking about here. And I really hope that everybody else working on those thinks about it as well. And of course, the Pi Zero thing would work itself out once they come back down to earth for prices. You know, I think I just spent $80 on a kit just so I can get one for testing. It's supposed to be a $15 module with a $10 micro SD card, you know.
Yeah.
So,
look, I mean,
hopefully
it will come down. It's just a matter of when, I think. And again, you know, in the meantime, hopefully, you know, junk PCs and VMs and Docker containers and things will keep everybody sort of happy for the short term. But yeah, I guess on the Wi-Fi front, the tricky bit there is the latency. So if you've got a particularly fussy console that expects, you know, it doesn't expect data to come in fast, but it expects it to come in consistently. So it's a bit like the whole concept of variable lag, right? Like it's not the lag that kills, it's the difference. So it's that kind of concept at a data level, where it can cause hiccups and things like that. But again, like if these things are orders of magnitude different, if you're talking, like 2-speed CD-ROM where I need 300 kilobytes per second guaranteed, and I've got Wi-Fi that can do 30 megabytes a second, I can safely assume that that consistency is there. And again, like if you've got gear that's close enough, just behind me I've got a separate Wi-Fi router and network just for my old retro games, which is this room that I'm sitting in here. So I've got 3, there's a wall there, there's a wall there, and there's a wall there full of retro crap. And it's all like older Wi-Fi, so I've got a separate Wi-Fi for that. So, having those sorts of things where it's like, yeah, it's kind of inconvenient because you're still having to wire things up, but having a Wi-Fi that's in the middle of that room that services everything in this room consistently, that's an option too for people if these, always Wi-Fi devices start getting popular.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing too is, especially for the Pi 02, but maybe even for some of the ODEs, if the concept is you select your file from the network and it copies it to the micro SD card and launches from there, then it really wouldn't matter past that, because it's just, there is no latency because it's there. You would just have to wait for it to copy over the network, which, depending on your network speed, that could be 5 seconds, maybe a minute if it's a DVD or something like that.
Well, a lot of these things,
I think that one's
a lot of these things buffer anyway, right? So a lot of the flash carts there's a zip file on the SD and it loads into some sort of RAM or flash ROM that's sitting there that's a little bit higher speed, and so it's doing some sort of buffer. So yeah, that could just be changed from, instead of loading over SD, it's loading over the network into its little buffer. So that same sort of 2-second load, and then off you go. Everything from there, super low latency and working as expected. And then scaling that up right to DVD level. If your buffer is big enough, like having a 1 gigabyte of flash probably isn't that crazy anymore, right? Like that used to be a crazy concept. Yeah, it's not crazy anymore. So if that's your buffer, you can buffer a whole CD-ROM to that. That's a whole PlayStation game.
Yeah, I'd also love to see in the future Crix release like Wi-Fi versions of the portable ones, Game Boy, Game Gear, and have something where you could just go right in the menu and press sync. So that way you're still only messing with your ROMs on RetroNAS on your main location, so you don't have to copy, and you don't need long fingernails to poke in one of those Terra Onion carts. Like, you just, whatever it is, right? You just you have it all in one place, and then you press sync, but both ways. So it sends your save files to the central location and pulls any changes that you had, so that way you still have all the ROMs on your cart for gaming on the go for your handheld stuff, but you don't have to worry about messing around and because for you and me loading up, I mean, you probably have something scripted in command line, but I would load up free file sync and press a nice little GUI button where I get to see what files are on both sides. But this is stuff you and I do every day for other reasons anyway. So people who aren't IT nerds, just to turn it on and press a sync button, anybody could do that.
Yeah, I mean, there's some crazy stuff I've got planned. I'm testing a whole bunch of cloud sync tools, so you can have all your games sitting on OneDrive or Google Drive or whatever, and they're loading up on your retro console. So that works. The tricky bit is making it easy for people to use. So like you said, like it's pretty easy for me to do that kind of stuff, but putting that in a presentable way to people and being secure, because now you're starting to mess with like people's cloud accounts. Like that's something that can't leak out, right? So that starts to get a bit tricky. I've got a tool on there. So there's a company I really like, GOG or GOG, Good Old Games is what that stands for. And they sell mostly retro. They do a few console releases every now and then, but it's 99% Windows 95, Windows 2000 kind of era games. It's the same company that CD Projekt the Polish company, they did the Witcher series and Cyberpunk. Same company owns GOG. So yeah, all DRM free digital, and because it's DRM free and because of the way that their system works, and it's working now, you can use RetroNAS to put in your credentials, and RetroNAS will store those off to the side. It doesn't actually use your credentials; it generates a cookie and stores the cookie off to the side, so your username and password are never stored. The cookie's hidden away, so you can't get to that through a file share or any of the insecure sort of methods that RetroNAS exposes. And then you can hit a button and it'll pull your whole library down. So think of it like offline Steam. Yeah, so if you, like I've got, I don't know, 30 or 40 games on GOG, and it's really nice to just hit a button, walk away, come back, and they're all synchronized to my RetroNAS, and then I can fire those up on my Windows 95 machines or whatever and play them natively. So that's all working too. But yeah, ROM loading from cloud, that's kind of something I want to try and make easy as well. I don't know how many people would like that or use that, but you know, it might also be an easier way to sort of distribute stuff. But yeah, who knows, right? Like, there's a lot of possibilities. Just got to try and make it easy for people. That's the tricky bit.
Yeah, that is by far the tricky part. And you know, I'm very curious to see if somebody's going to step up to the plate, especially when prices come back down to earth, and do something like a Pi 4, you know, 8 terabyte USB 3 combo where everything is pre-configured, and all you do is plug it into your network, and maybe even, you know, hopefully set a password that's somewhat secure. So even if, you know, even if people don't even want to change it, at least it's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Same combination I have in my luggage. But plug all that stuff in. I love that fucking movie. You plug all that stuff in and just have it work. So then you open up your browser, or not even a browser. You just open up your Explorer window, or, you know, connect to the network and just start dumping your ROMs over. My only concern is the same problem I have with, which, you know, there's no stopping this, but I can't tell you how many times I've logged onto a website and one of the banner ads is, you know, here's an 8 gigabyte card with every Game Boy ROM on it for $25, and it's like, that really pisses me off when I see that, because it's just, you know, most people who do this don't do this because they want to steal. They do this because it's like, I just want to have a convenient location for all my ROMs. So I am kind of afraid that people are going to start selling, you know, 8 terabyte hard drives loaded. But hopefully we could police our own community and just call people out when that happens. But there's a big difference between buying a Raspberry Pi connected to a USB hard drive that's got, you know, everything pre-configured, maybe dumped a 240p test suite and some open source stuff on there, just to, you know, Cave Story, whatever else is freeware nowadays, just so people could have something to reference, but not actually, you're not selling the ROMs and you're not selling the software. You're just selling the hardware that you've bought with a little uptick for how much time it took you to image and configure it.
I think too, I don't know, I feel like a lot of the people, I've got friends who are testing this for me, as well as yourself, obviously, you're testing this for me, and a lot of the people who are testing this for me tend to own a lot of, like, a variety of old hardware. And I find those people will also have a variety of old software. They're in it for the collection, and they're in it for the, and, you know, and they've spent lots of money over lots of years, right? Like, you and I were buying this stuff new as kids, and we're still buying it as adults. So I think the community who are sort of maybe interested in RetroNAS probably aren't the, like, you know, the dirty ROM sellers. I think they're the kinds of people who, you know, crazy people who are buying legit cartridges to then, you know, solder on translation chips and things like that. It's that kind of community. Like, they're so passionate about the stuff. Yeah. So yeah, I think there'll be a lot of good spirit about it.
Me too. And I have absolutely had the experience that very, very often the people who are the most obsessed with downloading every ROM ever also have huge physical collections, still go to local game stores, still go to expos. It's very rare to find the bottom feeder that just goes, oh, I could make some extra dollars off of this by illegally copying an SD card. Cool, let me do it. And I'm glad that's not the common thing, but we do have to kind of watch out for that. But just to one more time remind everybody, in case you're, you know, walking or driving and half listening, people that put together hardware packages with RetroNAS pre-installed is totally cool, because that's not stealing. It's open source software and somebody's taking their time to configure it. It's just people that would dump full ROM sets on it. That would be the scummy part.
Yeah, absolutely. And man, I'd love to see that one day. If there ever turned up a pre-configured thing that was just ready to rock and roll, you know, sans ROMs, obviously, just ready to go, turn it on and it works, that'd be pretty cool.
Agreed. So what do you think are the aspects of it that you would want help on in the short term? We talked a lot about the longer term stuff, but, like, you know, in the next month or so, people with Linux knowledge and people with skills to do this stuff, what do you think would be the first few things that you would want help
I think straight up just a lot of testing. Like the more people who can, because it's always that thing when you make a tool, you use it in the way that you intended it to be made, and it takes a lot of people doing stuff with it who don't think like you and finding the edge cases and breaking it. So I'd love a lot of people just to try it out. I think would be the big one. Ideas as well. Like on my GitHub, I've opened up the ideas section, so you don't have to go in there and do like nerd level, like pull requests and stuff like that. You can just get in there and start chatting. I've got my Twitter address there too, so if people want to talk to me on Twitter about it. But yeah, if people want to just talk to me about it, like if they've got some weird esoteric bit of stuff flying around that they want to work, let me know, and I'll. There's an ideas page as well in the source. If you look at the source, there's an ideas.md. Click on that. It's just all the stuff that I want to do in the future. So getting an idea of what people want, testing what's already there, different configurations of both the end user stuff. So like if people have, like I've got a fair few consoles and things like that, but I don't have every console ever made of every version, right? So like, I've got like 3 PlayStation 3s, but they're not every model of PlayStation 3 ever made. So if people can test more stuff and find out what happens, that'd be really cool. If people are technical, any help on the software development side would be awesome. I've spoken to you about this. Like, I'm not a web developer, and I'm a really shitty developer. So like, if someone wants to have a crack at a GUI for this, like the whole back end is done in Ansible. It does the heavy lifting in terms of actually installing stuff. Really, just putting a GUI over the top of that makes that more user friendly. That'd be awesome. Especially, I always emphasize this: if people do GUIs, I love web GUIs, because if I can control it from my phone, that's awesome.
Right.
So yeah, that kind of stuff would be.
So
really
I do want to talk about the
Yes.
GUI for
Yep.
a second. So just to put things into perspective, where it is right now as we're recording this, how this works is after you've installed it, if you follow my guide to the T or yours as well, you could bring up your web browser, you type in RetroSMB:9090, you log in, you click on terminal, and you hit the up arrow on your keyboard, and that brings up the last command, which is most likely going to be launch RetroNAS, and then it shows up with your GUI. So really, once it's installed, and once you get to that point in the video that I released, where it's like, okay, you're done. You never need to do this again unless you need to upgrade, but now you could just use it. It kind of does have a GUI. It's 1 or 2 more steps than you would normally have, but ideally, so if you're afraid of the command line, or if you just hate it because you've been using it since birth, like me, it's not bad now. It's not bad at all, but it would be really nice to get to the point where once RetroNAS is loaded, so maybe we get a group of people to manage our Raspberry Pi images, just like they do for a lot of other projects, good groups of people that are doing nightly or weekly builds to make sure everything's up to date. So if it's at the point where you image your micro SD, you stick it in your Pi, or image your SSD and just stick it in any PC, plug it into your network, and then just go to your browser and type in, RetroNAS, and then have everything through the browser. So your phone, your PC, whatever else, you could finish setup. You could, I don't know if storage drives, that would also be a big deal. If even you could work on that right through the same GUI interface, that might be a little rough, but and I do also knowingly want to emphasize the point of this is just dressing this thing up. It's not changing what it is. It's just putting a fancy dress on it, because all the functionality's there. I'm just simply talking about how to get to that functionality.
Yeah. So like you said, the GUI is we call it a TUI, a text user interface. So it's not command line, but it's kind of in the middle, right? So it uses a bit of software called the Linux software is called Dialog, and it uses a bit of software called Cursors. Anybody who's been around Unix and Linux forever knows what those things are. But I guess for people who maybe aren't familiar with that, if you ever used a Raspberry Pi and run the raspi config command, so that's like Raspberry Pi's official documentation on how to do things like set your Wi-Fi region or set your keyboard or any of that kind of stuff. So if you've got the headless or the SSH version or the no GUI version of Raspberry Pi OS, that's the tool that Raspberry Pi OS or Raspberry Pi Foundation themselves use. So yeah, it's not terrible. It's like a halfway point between a command line. You don't have to remember anything. The menus are there. You can navigate around and guess and get it right 99% of the time. So that's all kind of cool. The other popular project that uses that same bit of software is a bit of software called PyKiss, which I forget who writes that, but it's a pretty cool bit of software. It lets you do all sorts of like game installs and hacky upgrades of like if you want to test bleeding edge 3D graphics drivers and things like that for your Pi. Pretty much the same thing as what I'm doing. So you download one script off the internet, it installs this thing, and then the TUI comes up and you just follow your nose through the TUI. So yeah, it's kind of a middle ground for people who suck at programming, which is why I'm using it. But yeah, like if anybody wants to have a crack at making a nice web GUI over the top, more power to them.
Yeah, I mean, it is at the point where I must have installed it, I don't know, 40 times now, just to like, because not only was I running into issues, all right, so when I was doing this stuff, I always want to try what's the most efficient way. So I'm looking through my notes, and I ran this command 4 times. Why do I need to run it 4 times? And it's also funny because I don't have a deep understanding of what it was I was doing, so I'm going through and I just kept doing it over and over, and I found the set of steps where it's the least amount of steps, and all you have to do is just look on the screen or look at the web page and read the exact words, type them in and hit enter, don't make a spelling error, and you're done. So you don't actually need to understand what's going on. You just need to be able to look at something and type the same thing. And, even if you're a super slow typer and you used the oldest SD card or spinning hard drive on the planet, we're still talking about maybe a half hour start to finish if you're just following it and stepping up. I mean, I guess if you have a super old drive, maybe an hour, but that's not an hour of work. That's press enter, go pour yourself a beer, wait for it to finish, come back type of thing. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, it's in a good place now, without a doubt. And the only major change I could see in the short term is just how it looks, but not how it functions. So the functionality is there. I mean, a major change for beginners who are setting this stuff up, because that's the point I wanted to make in both videos, is that it's a little bit of work now, but it's not like you then have to do this all over again in the future when there's a new version. You just could run an updater. And I guess that's another thing that you were talking about too, is different ways to update it, right?
Yeah, so at the moment, every time you run it, it'll just pull the latest code. So I guess it's kind of, I would call it sort of a beta release at the moment. It's about that sort of level of unlikely to breakness. Yeah, so, but yeah, what it'll do is it'll just grab the latest code all the time. At some point, I'd really like to change that to have a stable release and a testing release, and then people can opt in and opt out on the fly. That'd be pretty cool too. I think I can do something like that, but that'll come a little bit later. But again, that shouldn't affect anything in terms of, like you said, like if people install it today and then want to quote unquote update it in however many months' time, that all works. The other thing I'd like to do is have an understanding of what you have and haven't done. So if for some reason because it's all open source in Linux, you can get in the back end and then muck with it after the fact. So if you want to go and customize your Samba install and put in custom shares and everything, you can do that. But if you totally screwed it up without having to hunt through the menus and reinstall everything for yourself, or the big one I think is if you change your storage path, if you have a major upgrade to your storage and completely change the storage path, you'd have to go and reconfigure all the utilities one by one. So having it understand where everything is and just doing just do it all again and just automate that because it's recorded somewhere what you've already done. I think that'll probably be another thing. But again, none of that will really change, the whole process or any of the things that you have to do or break it between now and then. So once that thing works, it's not going to require you to reinstall anything. It'll just be an add-on on top.
Yeah, and I definitely wanted to drive the point home that what you just said about changing the hard drive is literally if you're changing from one drive to another. If you're moving that drive from a Pi to a server, or taking it out of the case and plugging it into SATA, there is no configuration. Yep. It's all just right there, so you don't have to worry about any of that. The other thing too that I thought was pretty neat was when we were talking about, let's make this change to this share, and you said, all right, we'll just reinstall the Mr. bit. I kind of went, all right, so what do I have to do? Do I have to reset this? Do I have to change this? Do I have to delete this? And you're like, no, just press that button and that's it. And that was it. Didn't erase anything. It didn't change the configuration. There was no complicated. I didn't have to reference my install notes. I literally just went to Mister, hit install, and then it added the new directories and configured it, and everything was fine. So that's very cool
well,
too.
that's the power of Ansible. So Ansible, the thing that drives the whole thing, you don't install things per se. Like, you're not copying stuff, or you're not overriding stuff, in the traditional sense where we think about installs, where it's like, I've got some software here and I copy it on there, and whatever was there and that I've changed, I'm now going to blast and lose. The whole point to Ansible is that you define what you want the end state to be, and Ansible figures out what it's got to do to get there. So, like the Mr. example, like we had to throw in a couple extra directories that we'd missed in the config. All the other ones are already done. So Ansible looks at that and goes, yeah, that's already there. I'm going to leave it alone. I'm just going to add in the stuff that changed between now and then. So that's kind of the beauty of using that Ansible tool. Originally, when I was kind of planning how I was going to build the whole thing, I was thinking about scripts in my head that I was going to write myself, and then kind of had a, like, you're an idiot moment where it was like, no, I use this tool all day, every day at work, and it's the perfect answer. The one downside to Ansible is that it does take a little while to install. It's kind of, the package size for, if you've got a really crappy micro SD card, that's the bit that takes all that time at the beginning for the install. The product itself is really lightweight. Like, it'll run off next to nothing in terms of CPU and RAM. It just takes up a bit of disk real estate with a lot of files, still Python based. So yeah, it can be a bit heavy to install on an older SD card. But outside of that, like, if you installed it on, say, a VM running on Unraid, it would install in 2 seconds. It's that quick. That's kind of the difference between the Raspberry Pi IO and a faster SSD or something. But yeah, that's the magic bit. That's the bit that figures out what's different and what has to change, and that's why, if you quote unquote reinstall something, so say you've got Samba installed, and you do something and then you rerun that installer, it's not going to blast what's there. It's just going to fix up whatever's broken, so to speak, because it already knows what's there and it knows where it needs to get to be working.
The other thing I think is going to be interesting is how symlinks are integrated into this, because I was been talking to the Recall Box team, awesome group of people, and it would be neat to have anybody who wants their project supported just to create a symlink package. And I kind of wonder how that would change the structure of the hard drive. And, once the files are on the hard drive, moving directories around takes seconds, actually probably microseconds if you're just running a script here. But I wonder if the end result a couple months from now, or heck, weeks, how people are in this community, if somebody's passionate about something, they're diving right in the deep end. But I wonder if the file structure is going to change to console software, computer software, and all of the subdirectories under there. And then when you click on Mister, it's actually creating a list of symlinks to match the Mister's folder structure. And if you click on Recall Box, it'll create a list of symlinks to mimic the Recall Box folder structure, so that you're pointing to the exact same ROMs or CD-ROM images or whatever else. All you're adding is the symlinks to those folders, so that software thinks everything's all in one directory, but it's not. It's all organized. That's already the groundwork for that's already there, right? Because it's just Linux, and symlinks work fine on it, so that's totally doable, right?
Yeah. So I guess explaining it to people who aren't storage nerds, so you can do a thing on a Linux file system called a symbolic link, or a symlink, and the idea is that you can drop. It's kind of like a shortcut in Windows, but not that. Like a Windows shortcut, something a little bit different. But the idea is that any application can look at a symlink and think it's pointing to a folder somewhere, and you can sort of... so, for example, you could have a folder that was all your, Super Nintendo ROMs sitting high up in a directory somewhere, or, hypothetical future, if we want to push this to a flash cart that supports it or something like that. But then you also want it available to Mister, and Mister has a set of rules about where it wants its ROMs to live, in what place, and Recall Box or something else wants it in a different place. Maybe one's called SNES and one's called Super NES. They've got different rules about these sorts of things. Instead of having to have all your ROMs twice and waste a bunch of storage, we can just use symlinks, pointers. So we'll have one sort of source of truth, and then pointers to the ROM images, and then that way we can satisfy a whole bunch of different systems without having to double or triple or quadruple up on the amount of storage you're using. So that's one option. I don't know if I'll ever get it done, but I've got some advanced options that I want to look at. So RetroNAS is sort of a scaled down version of what I've been running for myself for years. So I've got a custom built NAS that I make myself, so I don't go and do third party ones like Synology or anything like that. It runs a file system that can do what's called copy on write, or snapshots they sometimes call it. So the idea is I can lie to the file system and I can copy a file somewhere else, and it's not a second copy of the file, but it looks like a second copy of the file. So it's kind of like Symlinks, but like the next level of complexity. If you've ever used the Smoke Monster ROM pack Python scripts that Smoke Monster put out ages ago, I think that repository now is maintained by somebody else. It's been taken over by another person. But inside those scripts, so for people who don't know, it's a really cool utility. It's a huge database pack full of checksums, digital fingerprints of files. So you can get random files from random places. They're named wrong, they're in the wrong place, whatever, and you run this utility over them, and it simply matches them against a known fingerprint, renames it to the correct name, and puts it in a folder. And what Smoke Monster's gone and done is he's put not only the ROMs in the right place, so like say it's the United States version of Sonic the Hedgehog, but then there's a whole bunch of subfolders down under that are like top 10 lists and things like that, and he'll re-put the ROM inside those lists. Now you don't have to copy the ROM twice, you don't have to waste all that space. He uses a thing called a hard link, which is similar to Symlinks and copy on write and all these sorts of things, where it's just a pointer to the file. So it looks like you've got the file in 3 or 4 places. You don't, you're only using one set of the data. So that's kind of cool. There's another thing I can do called Deduplication, which is a bit of software that runs over the entire disk, finds where 2 files exist of the same file and turns them into one file with a pointer, and does all that transparently behind the scenes. So that's a bit of software I want to put on there as well. And then of course inline compression. So some of the file systems that you can use in Linux and in RetroNAS right now will do transparent encryption behind the scenes. So if you don't want to hold all your ROMs inside zips for whatever reason, or you want to say store ISO images and the tool you're using isn't CHD compatible, so you can't compress it down to a CHD format, you've got to keep it in an ISO format, you can still keep that on disk and save 20-30% disk space with transparent encryption behind the scenes. So your applications and tools don't know that that's happened. But then if you run the deduplication tool over, say you've got, I don't know, the complete Sony PlayStation set for North America, right? That's huge. You run deduplication over that, you save about 30%. You run compression over that, you save another 30%. So, you've suddenly, you're down to a little over half of what it used to take to store that quite transparently. So that all exists. That is now there in Linux land. I'm doing that on my home NAS. Just a matter of putting those into menu items in RetroNAS that make it easy for people to just one button click and it happens behind the scenes. That's stuff that I want to have a look at. So I've gone kind of like off the range here a little bit, starting from your conversation.
No, I love this shit.
Symlinks, great idea. Want those. Also want a whole bunch of other things. Definitely want to look at, solving that problem of there's 10 different groups who want to use this solution, but they've already got these like hard-coded paths or whatever, long-term configuration that's existed for a long time. The other thing I don't want to do is I don't want to shit on everybody else's lawn, right? Like I want to make this as easy for them to use. So if there's something I can do in RetroNAS that makes it easier for whoever, RetroPie or RecallBox or whoever these people are that want to use it, just by dropping a couple of folders and symlinks in, I'll do it. So that's another thing that people can do, is test weird devices. If they're developers of those projects, great. I'd really love them to get back to me. But if other people have got a little bit of know-how and can get in the back of Batacetera or whatever and know how to fiddle with this stuff, let me know what I can do to make it easy to use those projects. Again, I don't use a lot of those things. I don't tend to. I've got my Mister and I've got my real console, so that kind of satisfies me. But if the emulation crowd want to do weird and wonderful things, let me know and I'll do whatever I can to try and make it work.
That's awesome. Now, for all the stuff that you were saying, the compression and the symlinks, that'll obviously work if people are streaming, for lack of a better word, the ROMs from RetroNAS to their device.
Yeah, it's
But
totally
what about
transparent.
people who want to sync? Yeah. So, but what about people who want to sync their SD cards for their EverDrive? You know, obviously you take it out, you put it in your computer, and while I'd love an auto sync command or something like that, you know, we could just copy it over now. But do those symlinks work on those embedded devices like EverDrives, or probably not, right?
They can. It depends on how you copy it. So tools like Rsync and a few other bits and pieces, even the command line copy command, you can tell it to treat a symlink like a symlink. So it'll pick up the symlink and copy the symlink, or you can say to it, follow the symlink. Ignore that symlink exists and treat it like a file. And in that case, it'll pick that up. So if I ever, like, in the back of my mind, I've got physical media tools as well that I want to integrate with this, right? So, for example, I want to be able to plug a USB-based floppy disk into this and write raw images to the floppy disk. So if you want to create boot disks for DOS and Windows 95, you can do that kind of stuff. So I've got skeletons for those projects working. But in the same breath, if you wanted to plug in a micro SD or something, USB to micro SD adapter, plug that in and hit the make all my ROMs exist on this device, we can make sure that the real ROMs exist on the device, and it's not something that copies a symlink by accident, so the end gets confused or something. So yeah, we can make sure that works.
I would love to see that. I would love to see that in a GUI. Like, imagine you open up your web browser, you go to RetroNAS, and then you go to Rsync or something, and then it's like, what are you using? An EverDrive Game Boy. Okay, plug in your micro SD card. Which drive is it? F drive. Cool. Hit the button and it syncs your saves, so you don't lose any of that. But then also goes through and makes sure the latest version of the EverDrive software is on there. I mean, I would love to have one of Crix's engineers jump into RetroNAS as well, because that would be a cool thing. Have the firmware already there, sync your ROMs, and have those symlinks properly done, so that you don't need a 32 gigabyte micro SD card. You could do it with a 16 if you want, or whatever, 64 to 32. It's probably cheaper to just buy a 32 these days anyway. But having all of that stuff automated, it's like, I mean, that would be mind-blowingly easier for everybody else than trying to figure out, like, well, what ROMs do I have on here? Did I back up my saves? Is this the latest version of the EverDrive software? Having all of that integrated into one thing would be cool. So hopefully some of Crix's buddies could assist with that as well.
Yeah, sure. You mentioned also, like, getting 240p test suite on there, grabbing latest firmware, all that kind of stuff. So again, my home NAS, repeating what I said before, RetroNAS is sort of a scaled-down version of what I've been doing for the last 10 years at home. I've got a million scheduled tasks on my home NAS that every night go out and fetch the latest version of open source Linux distributions and sync down my GOG library and grab firmware updates for all the machines in my house and all the different devices and all that kind of stuff. So really, they're not difficult to do. It's just a text file with URLs in it or something like that. So it would be very possible in the future to turn RetroNAS into that as well. With given a list of known things that are making sure that they're open source and we're complying with licenses and blah, 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 feeding that in there. So you've got this device that just in the background ensures you've got the latest version of everything sitting on your RetroNAS and you don't have to manually go out and fetch it. Like, there's sorts of things I'd love to do too. But yeah, like firmware for different things as well. If they're things that are just simply hosted out on a public website or hosted in GitHub, they're really easy to do. So like Swiss, for example, the actual binary sits out there on GitHub, and I've got a script that just queries that, and if that changes, if the version number changes, it just grabs the latest version and drops it in a folder. So migrating that over to RetroNAS as well is something I'd like to do.
That's very cool. I'm wondering too, I spoke a little bit to Risha about this, but I'm wondering, Mr. Sync, I'm wondering if that'll actually be a help, because my idea was have it randomly ping the GitHub, not all at the same time, because you don't want everybody running a net RetroNAS to hit Git at the exact same moment, but ping it, and if there's an updates or any updates, it just automatically pulls down. And then whatever script, like I'm sure the Epsilon would be willing to help out and have a script that's exactly like what they're normally doing, but just points to your RetroNAS, so that whenever you're updating your Mister, you're just copying your files over the local network, not going down across the internet. Everything's there. So if you have multiple Misters, it's actually probably easier to deal with. So I'm wondering how much time or effort that would actually save, but it's certainly worth looking into.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff. There's open source stuff too, right? So the popular ones are, there's a bit of software called Rsync, So Rsync understands binary differences and things. It can look at two files, and if this file is 25% different, it'll just grab the 25%, bring that down and reassemble. So you've saved not only yourself the bandwidth of downloading something, but the poor person hosting the thing doesn't get slammed and have everybody download the full version of something all the time. In Linux land, there's a bit of software called Zsync, or Zsync if you're American. And it's a similar kind of concept. So you have a Zsync file, and it knows it's the same kind of idea as BitTorrent or any of those sorts of things where it chunks a file up and it knows the fingerprints of each chunk. So it's smart enough to go, so Linux nightlies, for example, right? So, you're on the stable version of Linux, the next version is being developed now, the developers are pushing a new ISO image every 24 hours. Do you want to grab that full ISO image every 24 hours? No, you don't. You point to the Zsync file. The Zsync file understands the bits that have changed, and they can be in the middle, they can be at the end, they can be anywhere, and it just grabs the deltas, reassembles the file. So integrating that into update tools would be great, right? So, Mister's I'll make it sound simple. It's not a very complex thing. Mister is a large collection of these RBF files, right? And other things. There's a whole bunch of other things. But those RBF files, that's the binary bit of stuff that you need to program the FPGA. If those all used Zsync as well, then pulling down a ton of those for every person that grabs it would save a lot of bandwidth. I mean, the thing I think at the moment, Mister being hosted out on GitHub probably means that they're not paying for bandwidth per se, but heaps of options there. Git as well, so anything that's on GitHub can be pulled down with Git, and Git's the same. It will only pull down, so that's how RetroNAS updates itself. Every time you run it, it goes out to Git, checks if there's deltas, and pulls down the deltas. So if I've changed one line in one file, you download that one line of text. That's all you download. That's all that updates. So it doesn't go and grab
That's
the
awesome.
whole project every time. So, and I mean, this is my background, the whole Linux sysadmin thing. Like, that's what we do. We try and minimize the time it takes for things to always be in synchronization by only grabbing the bits that change. And that's kind of the theory behind Ansible as well. It only does what it needs to change. It doesn't grab the whole thing every time. So, that across hundreds of different open source projects that are out there, I think would be really cool. It's all, this is all me saying, hey, everybody else has to change, but they're all possibilities. They're things that we can all work together to achieve, or potentially just, if it's sitting on GitHub and it's a HTTP download, that can happen too.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't really interpret what you just said as these are things people need to change. I interpreted it completely as, hey, these are options that maybe might make it easier for the teams working on this. So maybe it's something you might want to look into anyway. So, but yeah, I mean, yeah. So here you go. You need to change. But, all right. Well, this is one of the most exciting projects I've worked on in a while, and it's one of those things where it's so easy to just glance over if you don't understand what it is. Like, oh, it's a file share. Like, and I'm really glad that you took the time to do the whole project, but also this podcast with me to kind of talk more about it, because I just really think it's one of these things where the more it sinks in, the more people realize what it could do, and that's both on the user side and on the development side. And I'm sure there's things that you and I aren't even thinking of that people are going to add to it at some point in the future as well. That'll be pretty exciting.
Absolutely. And like I said, if people have ideas of stuff that they want to do, even if it's like one-off niche bespoke things that they don't think anybody else will care about, like, let me know. There's an ideas page on the GitHub where I throw all these ideas against a wall, and that ideas page is not necessarily must be done. That is just here's some interesting stuff. So, if people want to either feedback on just that page and just say, oh, that's useless, I'd never use it, or no, that's really great, I really want this thing, so I can get a feel of what to do next. Or if they've got new ideas that I have not thought of, because, as I feel like I know a bit about a bit, but I don't know everything about everything. So if people have ideas on weird things that they want to look at, particularly, I mean, if you already know that an open source project exists that satisfies the requirement, that's even better. Then I don't have to do the research. But even if you don't, even if it's just like, I've got this old bit of whatever, I've got an old Palm Pilot PDA that only synchronizes over this cable, and I want it to read my email. Can you make that happen? Probably is the answer. There's probably a way to do silly things like that, and it doesn't hurt to add it to the ideas list.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to ask questions, because there's so many times in my life I've asked developer friends like, hey, is there any way you could add that? And they're like, yeah, that would take me 1 minute. Whereas, there's plenty of other times where I'm like, hey, would this be easy? Like, no, Bob, not even fucking close to easy. Not even a little bit. Like, so it's worth asking the question, though, because you never know. Maybe Absolutely. It's just a very quick thing that might make a bunch of people's lives easier that would barely take any time to implement. So, yeah, absolutely. Wherever your favorite place to chat is, start chatting about this stuff. Get a bunch of people on board. And just start using it and testing it. And once again, just to beat this to death, as long as you get a decent hard drive to start, something with enough space to grow, you could move that no matter what you decide to do with it. Or if you just decide, hey, this isn't for me, you can copy the files back off of it and then repurpose the drive. So the only thing you really need is a drive that's big enough to hold your ROMs. And that's the only thing you might need to purchase. But I have a feeling many of us have stuff just laying around that we could just start using it and see what it's like. All right, man. Well, thank you so much. If anybody wants to learn more about Dan, I'll leave links to Stick Freaks, to your YouTube channel, social media, to the first interview we did where we talked about your awesome CRT and arcade collection. And we'll revisit this again one day. Hopefully when the world opens back up, I could finally get out to Australia and go visit all my friends out there and just do this in person, playing all your arcade machines. So sweet. Well, thank you very much. And we will follow up with a lot of RetroNAS stuff as it comes.
Awesome. Thanks, Bob.